The crystal wine glass shattered against the marble floor of Lumiere, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. An instant hush fell over the dining room as crimson liquid stained the snow-white tablecloth and splashed onto Maxwell Blackwood's immaculate Italian suit. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Maxwell's voice cut through the silence, steel-gray eyes fixed on the waitress standing frozen before him. "This suit costs more than you make in 3 months." Valentina Mason, Val to her co-workers, stood motionless, her hand still extended from where the glass had slipped moments ago. A flicker of recognition had caused the stumble when she'd first approached his table, but she'd prayed he wouldn't notice her. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Blackwood," she managed, keeping her eyes downcast. "Sorry doesn't dry my suit or salvage my evening." Maxwell replied, his tone arctic. "I want to speak with your manager. Now." At 35, Maxwell Blackwood commanded attention whenever he entered a room. As founder and CEO of Blackwood Tech, his net worth of $12 billion made him one of New York's most powerful men, and most feared. The restaurant manager appeared instantly, profuse apologies flowing as he dabbed helplessly at Maxwell's ruined jacket. "This level of incompetence is unacceptable," Maxwell continued, ignoring the manager's efforts. "I expect her terminated immediately." Val finally raised her eyes to meet his, a flash of defiance breaking through her professional mask. For a split second, something sparked in Maxwell's expression, confusion, perhaps recognition, before it vanished behind his cold facade. "Mr. Blackwood, please," the manager pleaded. "Ms. Mason is one of our finest servers. This was an unfortunate accident." "Then you have remarkably low standards," Maxwell replied, standing abruptly. "I won't stay to argue the point. Either she's gone by the next time I dine here, or I'll take my business elsewhere." Without waiting for a response, he strode toward the exit, leaving stunned silence in his wake. In the staff bathroom, Val gripped the edge of the sink, fighting to control her trembling hands. 15 years hadn't changed him, still the same chiseled jawline, the same commanding presence. But the warmth that had once softened his features when he looked at her was gone, replaced by something hard and unforgiving. "Val, are you okay?" Her co-worker Jessie pushed open the door. "What happened out there?" "Nothing," Val replied automatically. "Just a difficult customer." Difficult? That was Maxwell Blackwood. He could buy this place and turn it into his personal closet if he wanted. Jessie leaned against the counter. "Management's freaking out. They can't afford to lose him as a customer, but they don't want to fire you either." "They won't have to." Val straightened, gathering her composure. "I'll resign." "What?" "No. You need this job for tuition." "I'll find something else." Val checked her reflection, wiping away any trace of tears that threatened to fall. "I can't be here if he comes back." What she couldn't explain was how the sight of him had ripped open wounds she'd spent 15 years trying to heal. How she'd built a new life as Val Mason, erasing every trace of Valentina's sores, the naive 19-year-old who'd fallen desperately in love with the heir to the Blackwood fortune. The girl who'd received a check for $500,000 to disappear from his life. Later that night, rain pounded against the windows of Maxwell's penthouse as he stood before the Manhattan skyline, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand. The waitress's face haunted him. Something about her eyes, those deep brown eyes that had held his gaze with unexpected familiarity. He loosened his tie and walked to his bedroom, opening the bottom drawer of his nightstand. Hidden beneath folders and documents lay a small velvet box. Inside, a delicate sapphire necklace caught the light as he opened it. "Impossible," he whispered to the empty room. Across the city in her tiny Bronx apartment, Val unlocked the rusted metal box she kept hidden behind her textbooks. Inside lay a handwritten letter, yellowed with age, and a bank statement showing a transfer of $500,000. Both bore the signature of Maxwell Blackwood. She unclasped the vintage wristwatch she always wore, her grandmother's final gift, and carefully opened the back panel. Inside was a faded photograph, 2 smiling college students outside Columbia University's library, their arms wrapped around each other, eyes bright with promise and love. The only evidence that Valentina Soares and Maxwell Blackwood had once planned a future together. She snapped the watch closed as thunder crashed outside her window. Tomorrow she would find a new job, somewhere he would never go. She'd spent 15 years avoiding him. She could keep running a little longer. Neither knew that destiny had already set its wheels in motion, or that the storm raging outside was nothing compared to the tempest that awaited them. Rain pounded against the windows of the Blackwood mansion in the Hamptons as Maxwell stared at the storm, whiskey glass in hand. The waitress's face had haunted him through the night and into the morning, following him even as he retreated to his family's estate. "You look troubled." Eleanor Blackwood glided into the library, her silver hair elegantly styled despite the early hour. At 65, she maintained the poise that had made her a fixture in New York society, though the years of an unhappy marriage had etched permanent lines around her eyes. "Working too hard, mother. That's all." Maxwell didn't turn from the window. Eleanor settled into a leather armchair. "Harrison called. He's asking when you'll visit." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "Tell father I'm busy." "He's dying, Maxwell." "We're all dying. Some just take longer than others." Eleanor sighed. "What happened last night?" "Your suit was at the door for the cleaners. A waitress spilled wine on me." Maxwell finally faced his mother. There was something about her. He trailed off, unwilling to voice the impossible thought. "Maxwell." Eleanor's voice softened. "It's been 15 years. You need to let her go." Anger flashed in his eyes. "You think I haven't tried? That I enjoyed watching you and father parade eligible women past me for a decade?" He crossed to his desk and opened the drawer, removing the velvet box. "I still have this. What does that tell you?" Eleanor's expression softened as she looked at the sapphire necklace. "That you're still punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. Valentina made her choice." "Did she?" Maxwell snapped the box shut. "She vanished, mother. No goodbye, no explanation. It wasn't like her. People change, especially at 19. Maxwell placed the box back in the drawer. "Not Valentina. Not like that." In his hospital room at Memorial Sloan Kettering, Harrison Blackwood scowled at his assistant. "What do you mean he's not coming?" "Mrs. Blackwood said he's caught up with work, sir," Diane Phillips replied, adjusting the flowers beside his bed. At 48, she'd served Harrison for 20 years, executing his every command with unwavering loyalty. "Work?" Harrison spat. "He means to let me die without making peace." "You still have time, sir." Harrison's thin fingers drummed against the blanket. "Did you look into that incident at the restaurant?" "Yes, sir. The waitress's name is Val Mason. She's worked at Lumiere for 8 months. And nothing unusual in her background check. Nursing degree from CUNY, currently enrolled in medical school at NYU. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Show me her picture." Diane handed him her tablet. Harrison stared at the employee photo, his pale face growing even whiter. "Impossible," he whispered. "Sir." Harrison's bony fingers gripped Diane's wrist with surprising strength. "Find out everything about this woman. Everything. Use whatever resources necessary." Across town, Val sat on a park bench in Washington Square, watching NYU students hurry through the rain. Her phone displayed 3 missed calls from Lumiere's manager, assuring her job was secure despite last night's incident. She couldn't go back, not with the risk of seeing him again. The financial aid office had been clear. Without her restaurant income, she'd lose her apartment before the semester ended. Medical school had already stretched her finances to breaking point. Val closed her eyes, remembering the look on Maxwell's face. The flash of something before coldness had reclaimed his features. Had he recognized her? After 15 years and the careful reinvention of herself, was it possible? She checked her watch. Her afternoon hospital shift started in an hour. At least Bellevue Hospital was safe. Billionaires didn't frequent emergency rooms. "Excuse me." Val looked up to find a middle-aged woman in an expensive raincoat standing before her. "Valentina Soares." Val's blood froze. "I'm sorry, you have the wrong person." "I don't think so." The woman sat uninvited. "My name is Diane Phillips. I work for Harrison Blackwood." Val stood abruptly. "I don't know who that is." "Please sit, Miss Soares. Or Mason, if you prefer. This is a friendly conversation." "There's nothing friendly about tracking down someone who clearly doesn't want to be found." Diane smiled thinly. "Mr. Blackwood is dying. Cancer. He has matters to resolve before he passes." "What could that possibly have to do with me?" "He'd like to meet with you. Just once." Val laughed bitterly. "After what he did. After what his son did. Tell Harrison Blackwood I said he can rot in hell." Diane's expression hardened. $500,000 wasn't enough to buy your silence permanently? "That money was returned to your boss's son 15 years ago. I never touched a penny of it." Surprise flickered across Diane's features before she controlled it. Nevertheless, Mr. Blackwood insists on meeting. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Or what? NYU might be interested to learn their scholarship recipient falsified her identity on application documents. Fraud has such unpleasant consequences for medical licenses. Val felt the ground shift beneath her. Everything she'd worked for, threatened in an instant. Fine. One meeting. Diane handed her a business card. Wise choice. A car will pick you up at 1:30. As the woman walked away, Val clutched the card so tightly it bent. 15 years of running, and the past had found her anyway. In his penthouse office at Blackwood Tower, Maxwell reviewed acquisition reports without seeing them. His mind kept returning to the waitress, to the possibility he'd shoved aside as impossible. His assistant knocked softly. "Sir? Drake Sullivan is here." Maxwell nodded, and a compact man with observant eyes entered. "You wanted information on a Val Mason?" Drake handed over a slim folder. Maxwell opened it to find a copy of Val's driver's license and employment history. Nothing unusual until he reached the college transcripts. "Her records only go back 10 years, Drake explained. "Before that, nothing. It's like she didn't exist." Maxwell stared at the photo. The resemblance was uncanny, but 15 years changed a person. The waitress was harder, more guarded than the laughing girl he remembered. Find out who she was before she was Val Mason. Drake hesitated. "That kind of deep background check isn't exactly legal without cause, Mr. Blackwood." Maxwell reached for his checkbook. "I'm not asking you to break the law, Drake. Just bend it gently." Later that evening, Maxwell found himself parking outside Lumiere. He told himself he needed confirmation, one way or another. The maitre d' greeted him effusively. "Mr. Blackwood, we weren't expecting you tonight. The waitress from yesterday, Mason, is she working?" The maitre d' looked uncomfortable. "She called in her resignation this morning, sir. We tried to convince her to stay, but—" Maxwell left without another word, frustration building. If it was her, if the impossible was somehow true, why would she run rather than confront him? Unless she truly didn't want to be found. The thought stopped him cold as he reached his car. Why would Valentina hide from him? What had happened 15 years ago that he still didn't understand? Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would have answers, one way or another. The sleek black town car pulled up precisely at 1:30 outside Val's apartment building in the Bronx. The neighborhood was a far cry from the Upper East Side world of the Blackwoods. Here, graffiti-decorated storefronts and children played on fire escapes despite the lingering rain. Val stepped out wearing the most professional outfit she owned, a navy pantsuit she'd bought secondhand from medical school interviews. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, armor against whatever awaited her. The driver opened the door without a word. Val slid into the leather interior, her heart hammering against her ribs. 15 years of careful avoidance, ending today. At Memorial Sloan Kettering, Diane Phillips waited in the lobby, tapping impatiently on her tablet. Her expression remained neutral as Val approached. "You're punctual. Harrison appreciates that. Let's get this over with." They rode the elevator in silence to the VIP floor. Val had been in plenty of hospitals, had worked in them for years, but never one where patients had private suites with Central Park views and original artwork on the walls. "Wait here," Diane instructed, stopping outside a door. "I'll prepare him for your visit." Val remained in the hallway, fighting the urge to flee. What could Harrison Blackwood possibly want after all these years? And how had they found her? The door opened, and Diane beckoned her inside. Harrison Blackwood lay propped against pillows, monitors beeping softly beside him. Once an imposing figure in New York's elite circles, he now resembled a withered scarecrow, skin stretched taut over his skull. Only his eyes retained their notorious intensity. "So," he rasped, "Valentina Soares returns from the dead." Val remained near the door. "I'm only here because your assistant threatened my future. Say what you need to say." Harrison's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. "Direct. I always appreciated that about you. You never knew me. I knew enough. Scholarship student. Brazilian immigrant parents. Aspiring doctor." His gaze drifted to the window. "Ambitious girl from nothing, targeting my son and his fortune." Val's hands clenched into fists. "Is that why you called me here? For one final insult before you die?" "I called you because I needed to see for myself." Harrison's voice rasped. "To confirm my son's little waitress incident wasn't coincidence. It was. I had no idea Maxwell frequented that restaurant. Yet you ran the moment he recognized you. I didn't want trouble. Harrison's laugh dissolved into a coughing fit. When he recovered, he fixed her with a penetrating stare. The money. What did you do with it? I told your attack dog already. I returned it. The day after I received it, and your son's charming letter. Confusion flickered across Harrison's face. What letter? Before Val could respond, the door swung open. Maxwell stood in the threshold, expression darkening as his gaze moved from his father to Val. What is this? He demanded. Diane stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, your father is resting. Answer me. Maxwell cut her off, never taking his eyes from Val. What are you doing here? Val straightened her spine. Your father summoned me. Apparently, he had some final insults to deliver before cancer finishes what his black heart started. Harrison coughed again. Maxwell, I can explain. Valentina. Maxwell's voice softened, the name falling from his lips like a forgotten prayer. It is you. The moment stretched between them, 15 years of separation distilled into a single heartbeat. Hello, Max, Val finally said. His face transformed, anger giving way to bewilderment. Why did you leave? Why did you disappear without a word? Without a word? Val laughed bitterly. Your words were quite clear in your letter. As was your payment. What letter? What payment? Harrison pressed a button on his bed rail. Diane, escort Miss Soares out. My son and I need to speak privately. No. Maxwell blocked the doorway. Nobody leaves until I understand what's happening. Val reached into her purse and withdrew a folded paper, worn thin from years of handling. Your letter. Your signature. Your money. Though I returned every cent. Maxwell took the paper, unfolding it carefully. His face paled as he read words he'd never written, beneath a signature that perfectly matched his own. I never wrote this, he said, looking up with haunted eyes. I never sent you money to disappear. Then who did? Val demanded. As one, they turned to Harrison, who had sunk deeper into his pillows. You needed a clean break, Harrison said to Maxwell. You were throwing away your future on a college romance. Maxwell's hands shook. You forged a letter in my name? You drove away the woman I loved. You were 21, hardly more than a child, Harrison retorted. The Blackwood heir couldn't marry the daughter of immigrants. I did what was necessary. Val stepped toward the bed, rage propelling her forward. You destroyed lives for your pride. Do you know what happened after I left? My mother died alone because I was too ashamed to face my family after being bought off by rich Americans. You could have taken the money, Harrison replied coldly. I would rather starve than touch your blood money. Maxwell placed a hand on Val's shoulder. We need to talk, Valentina. Not here. She shrugged away his touch. We have nothing to say to each other. 15 years of lies say otherwise. Diane moved to intervene. Mr. Blackwood, your father needs rest. Let them go, Harrison ordered, suddenly looking exhausted. But Diane stays. Maxwell gave his father one last look of disgust before following Val into the hallway. Neither spoke until they reached the hospital lobby. My car is outside, Maxwell said quietly. Please, just give me 10 minutes. Val hesitated, 15 years of caution warring with the need for answers. 10 minutes. Then I never want to see a Blackwood again. In the plush interior of his Bentley, Maxwell stared at the letter, still struggling to process his father's betrayal. I searched for you, he finally said. For years. It was like you'd vanished into thin air. That was the point, Val replied, staring out the window. I changed my name, moved states, started over. Why not confront me? Why run? Val turned to face him. Your father threatened my family with deportation if I ever contacted you again. My parents had been in this country for 20 years, but they never got their citizenship. One call from Harrison Blackwood, and they'd have been sent back to a country they barely remembered. Maxwell closed his eyes, remembering his father's vindictive streak. I'm so sorry, Valentina. It's Val now. Valentina doesn't exist anymore. She's sitting right in front of me. Val shook her head. That naive girl died 15 years ago. I'm not her. Then help me understand who you are now. Rain began tapping against the windows, echoing the first night they'd met in the library at Columbia during a thunderstorm. Val had been shelving books. Maxwell had been searching for obscure economic texts for a paper. I'm someone who learned that love isn't enough against power and money, Val said finally. I'm someone who rebuilt her life from nothing, without the Blackwood millions. And now I'm 3 years into medical school, working multiple jobs to make rent, and planning a career in oncology. That's all you need to know. Maxwell studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the protective wariness in her eyes. This wasn't the carefree girl he'd fallen in love with, but the woman who'd emerged from the crucible of pain his father had created. Valentina, Val, he corrected himself. I never stopped loving you. Never stopped looking for you. Don't, she whispered. Please don't say things like that. It's the truth. Truth. Val laughed harshly. The truth is your father manipulated us both, and instead of fighting for me, you believed I'd abandoned you for money. I never saw any money returned, Maxwell countered. I never knew about any letter. Convenient excuses 15 years too late. The driver opened Val's door, signaling their 10 minutes had elapsed. She gathered her purse, pausing with one foot outside the car. Goodbye, Maxwell. For the second and final time. As she walked away through the rain, Maxwell made a decision. He wouldn't lose her again, not without uncovering every last detail of his father's deception. His phone buzzed with a text from Drake Sullivan. Found something. Meet me at your office ASAP. The game was far from over. Rain pelted the floor-to-ceiling windows of Maxwell's office at Blackwood Tower, 50 stories above Manhattan. Drake Sullivan waited inside, a stack of folders on the glass conference table. This better be important, Maxwell said, hanging his wet coat on the rack. I've had a hell of a day. Drake pushed a folder forward. It's important. I found Valentina's source. You're a day late. So did I. Drake raised an eyebrow. Then you know she legally changed her name to Val Mason in 2010? That she lived in Chicago for 5 years before returning to New York? That she graduated nursing school while working night shifts at a 24-hour diner? Maxwell sank into his chair. I knew none of that. There's more. Drake opened another folder. The money your father claims he sent her? I traced it. $500,000 was transferred from your personal account to hers on June 18, 2009. The next day, the exact same amount was wired back. That's impossible. I never authorized that transfer. Your signature is on the documentation. And there's a letter. I've seen it. Maxwell cut him off. My father forged my signature. Drake nodded. I suspected as much. The letter was printed from a computer in your father's office. The metadata confirms it. Maxwell rubbed his temples. What else? Her parents left the country 2 weeks after she disappeared. They sold their house in Queens at a significant loss and moved back to Brazil. My father threatened them with deportation. That tracks. Harrison Blackwood had connections with immigration officials back then. He donated heavily to politicians pushing anti-immigration policies. Maxwell opened his laptop. Show me everything you have on her current life. Drake handed him a third folder. She works 3 jobs, part-time at Bellevue Hospital, weekend shifts at an urgent care clinic in Brooklyn, and until yesterday, evenings at Lumiere. She lives in a rent-controlled apartment in the Bronx, pays her bills on time, and carries substantial student debt despite scholarships. Maxwell scrolled through images of Val's modest apartment building, her work schedule, even receipts from her local coffee shop. The methodical invasion of her privacy made him uncomfortable. This is enough, Drake. Sir, I asked you to find her, not stalk her. Drake closed his folders. Just doing what you paid for. And I appreciate it. You've confirmed what I needed to know. After Drake left, Maxwell stared at the New York skyline, mind racing. His father had orchestrated Valentina's disappearance, forged documents in his name, and threatened her family, all to prevent their relationship. But why? The Blackwoods weren't royalty. They were new money, barely 3 generations removed from immigrants themselves. His father's obsession with social standing had always seemed excessive, even for New York's elite. His phone rang. His mother. Maxwell, where are you? Your father's condition has worsened. I'm not coming back tonight. He's asking for you. Let him ask. Eleanor's voice hardened. Whatever he's done, he's still your father. He forged my signature, Mother. He sent Valentina away with a fake letter from me, then threatened her family with deportation if she ever contacted me. Silence fell across the line. Mother, I need to tell you something, Eleanor finally said. Not over the phone. Meet me at the house in an hour. Across town, Val entered her apartment, dropping her keys on the counter with shaking hands. The confrontation with Harrison and Maxwell had left her physically and emotionally drained. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. MB. She deleted it without responding and headed for the shower, desperate to wash away the day. Under the hot spray, memories crashed over her. The shock on Maxwell's face as he read the letter, his insistence that he'd searched for her, the raw pain in his eyes when he realized his father's betrayal. Could it be true? Had he really not sent that letter? Not authorized that money? The alternative was too painful to consider, that they'd lost 15 years to Harrison Blackwood's manipulation. After her shower, Val found 3 more texts from Maxwell, each more urgent than the last. She silenced her phone and opened her laptop, determined to focus on the oncology paper due next week. Her education had to come first. It always had. The knock on her door came just after 9. She knew who it was before opening it. Maxwell stood in the hallway, soaked from the rain, his expression grim. 5 minutes, he said before she could object. Then I'll leave and never contact you again if that's what you want. Val hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. Maxwell entered, taking in the cramped apartment with its second-hand furniture and walls lined with medical textbooks. His gaze lingered on a small potted orchid, the only luxury in sight. I just came from my mother, he began without preamble. She confirmed everything and told me why my father was so determined to separate us. Val crossed her arms. I'm listening. Your mother, Lucia. She and my father had an affair before she met your father. Val stared at him, disbelief washing over her. That's impossible. They met when she first came to New York in the 1980s. She worked as a cleaner at his office building. The affair lasted 6 months until she met your father and broke it off. My mother would never. She was 22, alone in a new country. He was a wealthy businessman who showed her attention. Maxwell ran a hand through his wet hair. My father feared that if we stayed together, somehow the truth would come out and damage his reputation. Val sank onto her sofa, mind racing. How can you possibly know this? My mother kept letters. Your mother wrote to my father when she found out she was pregnant with you, terrified it might be his child. Val felt the blood drain from her face. Are you saying? No. Maxwell quickly interjected. The timing made it impossible. You were unquestionably your father's daughter. But the fear was enough to make my father obsess over keeping us apart. This is insane, Val whispered. My mother never said a word. Would she have told her daughter about an affair with the father of the man she was dating? Val closed her eyes, remembering her mother, her kind, hard-working mother who had died of cancer 2 years after Val disappeared from the Blackwoods' lives. Had she recognized Harrison at family gatherings? Had she known what he'd done? I found this in my mother's safe, Maxwell said, removing an envelope from his jacket. It was returned with the money you sent back. Val took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a short note in her own handwriting. I don't want your money. I don't want your explanations. Never contact me again. V.S. I never received this, Maxwell said quietly. My father intercepted it along with the returned funds. He told me you'd simply vanished. Val looked up, meeting his eyes. Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. 15 years have passed. We're different people now. Are we? Maxwell moved closer, his voice softening. I still keep your necklace. You still wear that watch with our photo hidden inside. Val's hand instinctively went to her wrist, to the vintage timepiece that had been her one concession to sentimentality. How did you know about the photo? I put it there, remember? The night before graduation. You said you wanted to keep me close to your heart. The memory surfaced, Maxwell gently placing the tiny photograph inside the case. His promise that no matter where life took them, they would face it together. What do you want from me, Maxwell? A chance. Not to go back to what we were, we can't, but to see if there's anything left worth saving. Her phone rang, breaking the moment. The hospital's number flashed on the screen. I have to take this. Val answered, listening intently to the voice on the other end. Yes, I understand. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up, already moving toward her bedroom to change. Emergency at the hospital. I have to go. Maxwell nodded. Let me drive you. That's not necessary. It's pouring, and you said 20 minutes. The subway will take twice that. Val hesitated, practicality warring with pride. Fine, but this doesn't mean anything. As they rushed to his car, Maxwell's phone buzzed with a text from Diane Phillips. Your father has taken a turn. Doctors don't think he'll last the night. Maxwell silenced the phone without responding. His father could wait. For once in his life, Harrison Blackwood wouldn't be the priority. At Bellevue, Val jumped out before Maxwell could fully stop. Thank you for the ride. Valentina. Not now? I have patience. She disappeared through the emergency entrance, leaving Maxwell staring after her. Progress had been minimal, but it was something. She'd listened, let him into her apartment, accepted his ride. It was a start. As he pulled away from the hospital, he didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street, or Diane Phillips watching from the driver's seat, her phone already pressed to her ear. He's with her, she reported. What would you like me to do? In his hospital room, Harrison Blackwood struggled to speak through his oxygen mask. Whatever it takes. Keep them apart. He wouldn't die until he was certain his secret remained buried, even if it meant destroying his son's chance at happiness one final time. The emergency room pulsed with controlled chaos as Val slipped into her scrubs. 3 gunshot victims from a convenience store robbery had arrived simultaneously, overwhelming the night staff. For the next 4 hours, she lost herself in the work, checking vitals, assisting surgeons, comforting family members. This was her world now. Not fancy restaurants or billion-dollar empires, but the raw, honest business of saving lives. Mason, you're cleared to go. Her supervisor called at 2 a.m. Thanks for coming in. Val nodded, exhaustion settling into her bones. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city streets slick and gleaming beneath streetlights. She dug into her pocket for subway fare, then froze. Maxwell's Bentley idled at the curb, the man himself leaning against the hood. You waited, she said, approaching cautiously. I figured you'd need a ride home. I've managed fine for years. I know. He opened the passenger door. Just a ride, Val. Nothing more. Fatigue won over pride. Val slid into the car, sinking into leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent. How was your shift? Maxwell asked as they pulled into the deserted streets. 3 GSWs. All stabilized. GSWs? Gunshot wounds. Val leaned her head against the window. Sometimes I forget you live in a different world. Maxwell navigated through a yellow light. My father stabilized too. The doctors say he might last another week. I'm sorry. Are you? Val turned to face him. Whatever he did, he's still your father. And he's dying in pain. Yes, I'm sorry. Maxwell's grip tightened on the steering wheel. You're a better person than I am. It's not about being better. I've seen too many people die alone. They fell silent as the car crossed into the Bronx, the neighborhood growing progressively less polished with each block. My mother wants to meet you, Maxwell said finally. Tomorrow, if you're willing. Val stiffened. Why? She has something for you. From your mother. My mother's been dead for 13 years. Apparently, she gave something to my mother before she passed. Made her promise to give it to you if you were ever found. Val's heart quickened. What is it? She wouldn't tell me. Said it was for your eyes only. The car stopped outside Val's apartment building. Neither moved to exit. I have class at 10, then a shift at the urgent care until 8, Val said. After that, I'm free. I'll send a car at 8:30. Val reached for the door handle, then paused. Why are you doing this, Maxwell? After 15 years, why keep trying? He turned to face her, shadows highlighting the fatigue etched in his features. Because when you walked out of that restaurant 2 days ago, I felt the same emptiness I've carried for 15 years. Because whatever my father did, whatever time has passed, I can't shake the feeling that we were meant for something more than this. This, living half-lives. You working yourself to exhaustion to prove something. Me building an empire that means nothing without someone to share it with. Val looked away. I'm not working to prove anything. I'm working because medical school is expensive and student loans don't pay themselves. You could have taken the money and live with the knowledge I'd been bought off. No thank you. Maxwell reached across the console, his hand stopping just short of hers. One honest chance, Val. That's all I'm asking for. If, after meeting my mother, after hearing everything, you still want me out of your life, I'll respect that. Val studied his face, searching for the manipulation she'd taught herself to expect from powerful men. She found only vulnerability, the same openness that had drawn her to him at 19. Good night, Maxwell, she said softly, exiting the car. He watched until she safely entered her building before driving away. Inside her apartment, Val collapsed onto her bed, too exhausted to even remove her shoes. Her phone buzzed with a text notification. It was a photo of Maxwell with a woman, a model, judging by her perfect features, at what appeared to be a charity gala. Their posture suggested intimacy, his arm around her waist, her head tilted toward him. The caption read, "Some things never change." Be careful. The sender was unknown, the photo undated. Val stared at it until her eyes burned, then deleted it. Whatever game was being played, she was too tired to participate tonight. The next evening, precisely at 8:30, a town car arrived to collect Val from the Brooklyn Urgent Care Clinic. The driver handed her a small box when she entered. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to give you this." Inside was a simple silver hair clip with a small sapphire, identical to one she'd lost during a Columbia study session 15 years ago. "He found it in his economics textbook," the driver explained, catching her confused expression in the rearview mirror. "Said he's been carrying it ever since." The Blackwood mansion on Fifth Avenue loomed like a fortress among its neighbors, stone facade illuminated by discreet lighting. Inside, a maid led Val through marble halls to a library where Eleanor Blackwood waited, elegant even in casual attire. "Valentina." Eleanor rose, extending both hands. "Thank you for coming." Val accepted the brief touch, uncomfortable in the opulent surroundings. "Mrs. Blackwood." "Please, call me Eleanor." "Sit." They settled into facing armchairs. Maxwell was nowhere in sight. "My son won't be joining us," Eleanor explained, reading her thoughts. "I asked for this meeting to be private. He said you have something from my mother." Eleanor nodded, retrieving an envelope from a nearby desk. "Lucia gave this to me at a charity event 2 months before her diagnosis. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should make sure you received it." Val accepted the envelope with trembling fingers, recognizing her mother's handwriting immediately. "Did you know?" Val asked. "About her and your husband?" Eleanor's perfectly composed features softened with sadness. "Not until years later, when Harrison became obsessed with separating you and Maxwell. I confronted him, and he confessed everything." "Why didn't you tell Maxwell?" "Harrison threatened to divorce me without a penny if I interfered. I was a coward." Eleanor's gaze dropped to her hands. "By the time I found my courage, you had disappeared completely." Val held the letter tightly. "May I?" "Of course." Val opened the envelope carefully, extracting a letter written in her mother's flowing script. The Portuguese words blurred as tears filled her eyes. "My dearest Valentina, if you are reading this, I am gone, and the truth has finally found its way to you. I must confess my greatest shame and ask your forgiveness. Many years ago, before I met your father, I made a terrible mistake with Harrison Blackwood. When I discovered you were in love with his son, I was overcome with fear. Harrison threatened to tell your father about our past if I didn't help convince you to end the relationship. I was weak. I told Harrison about your plans to introduce Maxwell to your grandparents in Brazil after graduation. I helped him arrange the timing of his intervention. What I didn't know was how far he would go, the forged letter, the threats against our immigration status. When I discovered what he had done, it was too late. You had already disappeared. The cancer that takes my life feels like just punishment for my betrayal. Know that your father never learned of my shame, and that you are, without question, his daughter. The dates make this impossible otherwise. I hope someday you will find Maxwell again. I hope someday you can forgive me. With eternal love, Mother." Val folded the letter, tears streaming down her face. Her mother, her fiercely protective mother, had been manipulated just as she had been. "She never told me," Val whispered. "She was protecting you," Eleanor said gently, "as mothers try to do, even when we fail spectacularly." Val wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Why show me this now?" "Because Harrison is dying, and his secrets should die with him, not continue destroying lives." Eleanor leaned forward. "My son has never stopped loving you, Valentina. For 15 years, I've watched him build an empire while remaining emotionally frozen in time. We've both changed, perhaps, but some connections transcend time and circumstance." Eleanor rose and crossed to a cabinet, retrieving an old leather-bound book. "Maxwell's journal from Columbia. He left it here years ago." She opened to a marked page and handed it to Val. Inside was a pressed daisy chain, the crown Val had made during their first real date in Central Park. "He's kept every memento, every reminder of you." Eleanor's voice gentled, not out of obsession, but out of love. Val closed the journal, emotions warring within her. Where is he? Where he always goes when his heart is troubled. Columbia's library, the ancient history section. Val stood, decision made. "Thank you, Eleanor. For the letter. For the truth. What will you do now?" Val touched the silver clip in her hair. Find out if there's anything left to salvage from the wreckage your husband created. As Val left the Blackwood mansion, her phone buzzed with another anonymous text. More photos of Maxwell with various women, spanning several years. The message read, "Once a playboy, always a playboy. Ask him about Sophia Kent." Val hesitated, doubt creeping in. Then she deleted the message and hailed a taxi. "Columbia University Library, please." Across town, in his hospital room, Harrison Blackwood studied the surveillance photos Diane had sent to Val's phone. "She's meeting Eleanor," Diane reported. "And now she's heading to Columbia." "She's going to him," Harrison wheezed. "Send the rest of the photos." "All of them." "Sir, they're clearly manipulated. If she looks closely." "She won't. She'll be too emotional." Harrison struggled to sit up. "I've worked too hard to let this fall apart now." "With respect, sir, why does it matter anymore? You're dying. All the more reason to ensure my legacy remains untarnished." Harrison's eyes burned with feverish intensity. "Send them, Diane. Then prepare the car. I need to see my son." Diane hesitated, something like doubt crossing her features for the first time in 20 years of service. "Yes, sir." As her finger hovered over the send button, she made a decision that would change everything. Diane Phillips stared at her phone, Harrison Blackwood's command echoing in her ears. For 20 years, she had executed his every order without question, falsified documents, arranged convenient accidents for business rivals, and systematically erased Valentina's source from Maxwell's life. She'd told herself she was protecting the Blackwood legacy. Now, watching Harrison's obsession consume him even as death approached, she wondered what legacy was worth preserving. Instead of sending the manipulated photos, she opened a new message to Val's number. "The photos are fake. Harrison had them doctored. I've sent proof to your email." In the taxi to Columbia, Val's phone chimed with the notification. She stared at the message in disbelief, then quickly checked her email. There she found the original, unaltered images alongside the manipulated versions, plus a brief message. "I've served the wrong master for too long. Harrison is coming to Columbia. Be careful." The taxi pulled up to the university's main gate. Val paid the driver and stepped into the cool night air, her mind racing. After 15 years, she'd learned that her mother had been manipulated, Maxwell had been deceived, and Harrison was still determined to keep them apart. But why? The affair with her mother had ended decades ago. What power did that secret still hold? The library loomed ahead, its Gothic architecture softly illuminated against the night sky. Despite the late hour, students still occupied study carrels, heads bent over laptops and textbooks. Val moved through the familiar halls, memories washing over her with each step. She and Maxwell had first met in the ancient history section during her freshman year. She'd been shelving books for her work-study job. He'd been researching Egyptian economics for a paper. The ancient history section occupied the library's western wing, a quiet corner seldom frequented except by dedicated classics majors. As Val approached, she saw a solitary figure seated at a table by the window, silhouetted against the city lights. Maxwell hadn't changed his habits. Same table, same window, same posture as he leaned over an open book. "Some things never change," Val said softly. He looked up, surprise giving way to a cautious smile. "You came. Your mother gave me my mother's letter." Val moved closer, studying his face in the soft library light. "Did you know about their affair?" "Not until yesterday." Maxwell closed his book, an economics text, just like the one he'd been reading when they first met. "Did you read the letter?" Val nodded, sliding into the chair across from him. "My mother helped him. She told him about our plans to visit my grandparents in Brazil. She was protecting your father from the truth, by sacrificing my happiness. Parents make terrible choices sometimes, thinking they're protecting their children." Maxwell's voice was gentle. "My mother knew something was wrong when you disappeared, but she didn't have the courage to confront my father." They sat in silence, the weight of 15 years of manipulation settling between them. "I received something else," Val said finally, showing him her phone. "Diane Phillips has been sending me manipulated photos of you with other women. Apparently, she's had a change of heart." Maxwell studied the side-by-side comparison of the original and doctored images. "My father's still trying to keep us apart, even now." "Why?" "The affair was decades ago. Your mother already knows." "It's not just the affair." Maxwell hesitated. "When my mother confronted me earlier today, she revealed something worse. My father may have been involved in your mother's medical treatment. Val felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her. What? Your mother's oncologist was on the board of my father's foundation. My mother believes my father may have influenced her treatment options, delayed experimental therapies that might have helped her. Val gripped the edge of the table, nausea rising in her throat. He killed her. Not directly, but he ensured she received standard care rather than the cutting-edge treatments his donations were funding at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Maxwell's voice cracked. He was terrified she might reveal their past if you and I reconnected. The familiar surroundings blurred as tears filled Val's eyes. I went into oncology because of her. Because I watched her die believing the best care possible wasn't enough. And it might have been, if my father hadn't interfered. Maxwell reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. I'm so sorry, Val. Val pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. I need air. She moved blindly toward the stacks, seeking refuge among the ancient texts that had once brought them together. Maxwell followed at a distance, giving her space to process the devastating revelation. Among the shelves of books on ancient Egypt, Val paused, touching the spines of volumes she'd once shelved as a nervous freshman. Her entire adult life had been shaped by Harrison Blackwood's manipulations, her mother's death, her estrangement from Maxwell, even her career choice. Val. Maxwell's voice was soft behind her. Diane texted again. My father's on his way here. She turned to face him, anger crystallizing through her grief. Good. I want to confront him. He's dying. Any confrontation will only, what? Upset him? Hasten his death. Val's voice rose, drawing a few curious glances from distant students. He destroyed lives, Maxwell. He may have cost my mother years she should have had. I know. Maxwell stepped closer. And he'll answer for it. But not here, not like this. Val wanted to argue, but exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed her. 15 years of running, of rebuilding her life, of working to the point of collapse, all because of one man's obsession with keeping his past buried. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. I can't keep fighting ghosts. Maxwell reached for her hand again, and this time she let him take it. His touch was warm, familiar despite the years apart. Then stop fighting, he said gently. We both know there's still something between us, Val. Something my father couldn't destroy, no matter how hard he tried. Val looked at their joined hands. We were kids, Maxwell. We barely knew who we were. I knew I loved you. That hasn't changed. His free hand reached up to touch the silver clip in her hair. I kept this in my economics textbook for 15 years. Every time I opened it, I thought of you. The tenderness in his voice broke through Val's carefully constructed defenses. She'd spent 15 years convincing herself that what they'd shared had been nothing more than youthful infatuation, that the pain of its loss had been exaggerated in her memory. But standing here, in the place where it all began, with his hand warming hers, the truth was undeniable. What they'd shared had been real, and what remained between them still was. I'm not that girl anymore, she said quietly. The one who believed love conquers all. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking for a chance to know the woman you've become. Maxwell's thumb traced circles on her palm. The woman who fought for her education, who works 3 jobs to help others, who returned the money rather than sacrifice her integrity. Val's phone buzzed again. Another message from Diane. Harrison en route. ETA 5 minutes. He's almost here, Val said, showing Maxwell the screen. What do you want to do? Maxwell's jaw tightened. End this. Once and for all. They walked together to the library's main entrance, hands still linked. Outside, a black Cadillac pulled up to the curb. 2 hospital orderlies helped Harrison from the back seat into a wheelchair, an oxygen tank hissing beside him. Diane Phillips stood nearby, her normally impassive face lined with tension as she spotted Val and Maxwell emerging from the building. Maxwell, Harrison wheezed, his voice barely audible. What are you doing here with her? Reclaiming what you stole from us, Maxwell replied, his grip on Val's hand tightening. It's over, Father. We know everything. About the affair with Lucia, about the forged letter, about interfering with her cancer treatment. Harrison's sunken eyes moved to Diane, comprehension and rage dawning in his gaunt face. You betrayed me. I'm correcting a wrong that's gone on too long, Diane replied, her professional mask finally cracking. They deserve the truth. Val stepped forward, forcing herself to look at the withered man who had caused so much pain. Why? Why destroy so many lives to keep an affair secret? My mother never would have exposed you. Harrison's breathing grew more labored, each word a struggle. You don't understand. It wasn't just an affair. Father, don't, Maxwell warned, but Harrison continued. She threatened to tell everyone I was her child's father. Harrison's eyes fixed on Val with lingering hatred. She lied about the timing, tried to extort money. Val shook her head. That's impossible. My mother would never. DNA tests proved otherwise. Harrison cut in. You were never my child, but she made the threat. I couldn't risk the scandal, couldn't risk you and Maxwell together, digging into the past. Maxwell stared at his father in disbelief. All of this, 15 years of manipulation and lies, because of a threat that was proven false. My reputation was everything, Harrison insisted, his voice fading. The Blackwood name is worth nothing if this is how you protect it. Maxwell finished, disgust evident in his voice. Take him back to the hospital, Diane. I'll deal with this tomorrow. As the orderlies moved to return Harrison to the car, he reached out with surprising strength, grasping Val's wrist. He'll never be happy with you, he hissed. You're too different, too damaged by what's happened. Val leaned closer, her voice steady despite the emotions churning within her. The only damaged person here is you, Mr. Blackwood. And unlike you, I don't need to destroy others to ease my own pain. Harrison's hand fell away as a coughing fit overtook him. The orderlies quickly loaded him into the car, Diane climbing in beside him without a backward glance. As the Cadillac pulled away, Val felt a weight lifting, not completely gone, but lighter than it had been in 15 years. Are you okay? Maxwell asked, still holding her hand. Val looked up at the university buildings where they'd once been so happy, then back at Maxwell's concerned face. No, she answered honestly, but I think I could be. Someday. Maxwell smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Someday works for me. I've gotten pretty good at waiting. Beneath the stone arches of Columbia University, where their story had begun, Val and Maxwell stood together as equals. No longer the naive kids they once were, but adults who had survived the crucible of Harrison Blackwood's manipulation and emerged stronger. Coffee, Maxwell suggested, nodding toward the campus cafe that was still open for late-night studiers. Val smiled, her first real smile in what felt like forever. I still take it with almond milk and brown sugar. I remember. As they walked toward the cafe, neither felt the need to define what was happening between them. They had time now, time to rediscover each other, time to heal, time to see if what remained of their connection could grow into something new. For the first time in 15 years, time was finally on their side. 3 weeks passed. Spring bloomed across New York as Val and Maxwell cautiously rebuilt their connection. Coffee after her shifts, lunch between his meetings, walks through their old campus haunts. Maxwell downplayed his wealth, while Val appreciated the effort without mentioning that it couldn't erase their fundamental differences. Harrison remained in hospice care, his condition deteriorating. Maxwell visited daily, though Val kept her distance, unable to forgive the man who had potentially shortened her mother's life. One afternoon, Val received a text from Maxwell. Dinner tonight? Something important to discuss. 8 p.m. Or something nice. The formality gave her pause. With help from her classmate Zoe, Val borrowed a navy blue cocktail dress for the evening. At 8, Maxwell's Bentley arrived. Inside, Val noticed his tension. You look beautiful, he said, kissing her cheek. And you look worried. What's going on? My father passed away an hour ago. Val felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry. Should we reschedule? No, especially not tonight. They drove to an elegant townhouse on the Upper East Side, the Blackwood Foundation Gala. Inside, New York's elite mingled, discussing donations in 7 figures. Val felt out of place despite the borrowed dress. Maxwell introduced her to everyone. Doctors, researchers, hospital administrators, all greeting her with unexpected warmth. What's happening? She whispered. Why does everyone act like they know me? Because they've been funding your education, Maxwell explained. You're in the Blackwood Foundation's Immigrant Medical Scholars Program. My father didn't know I established it using my inheritance, or that I structured the criteria, hoping you'd qualify. Val stared at him. You've been funding my education without telling me? The selection committee chose you on merit. I just created the opportunity. Maxwell met her gaze. Tonight, I'm announcing the foundation's restructuring. It will become the Lucia Soares Memorial Foundation, providing cutting-edge cancer treatments to underinsured patients. You're naming it after my mother? It seemed fitting, given what my father did. Before Val could respond, a commotion drew their attention. Diane Phillips stood in the doorway, disheveled and uninvited. I need to speak with Maxwell Blackwood about Harrison. Security approached, but Maxwell waved them off. Diane handed him a manila envelope. You both deserve the truth about why he separated you. It wasn't just the affair, it was about the fire at Davidson Chemical in 1987. What fire? Val and Maxwell asked simultaneously. The one that killed 3 researchers, including your grandfather, Ms. Soares. Diane's voice softened. Harrison falsified safety reports. Your grandfather discovered it and threatened exposure. Harrison arranged the fire, then paid your grandmother to return to Brazil and never speak of it. Maxwell opened the envelope with unsteady hands, finding payment records, falsified safety reports, and newspaper clippings confirming Diane's story. When Harrison realized who you were years later, Diane continued, he became obsessed with keeping you apart. He feared you might uncover the truth about your grandfather. My father was a murderer, Maxwell whispered. Consider this my resignation and my atonement, Diane said before walking out. Val stood on shaky legs. I need to leave. Maxwell nodded, handing the documents to his assistant. Outside, the spring night felt suddenly cold. My father killed your grandfather, then separated us to hide it, Maxwell said. And my family took money for silence. Val wrapped her arms around herself. We're both descended from monsters and cowards. We are not our parents or grandparents, Maxwell insisted. We're not bound by their sins. Aren't we? I need time to process this. Alone. Diane reappeared, breathless. The press is already here. Someone leaked Harrison's death. Maxwell looked torn between duty and personal crisis. Go, Val said. Handle your announcement. He reluctantly gave her his car keys. Take my car. Val drove aimlessly through Manhattan, past Columbia where they'd first met, past the restaurant where they'd reconnected, past the hospital where her mother had died receiving less than the best care Harrison could have provided. The revelation about her grandfather changed everything. Her family history had been built on lies, lies paid for with Blackwood money. Was her reconnection with Maxwell equally tainted? He'd created a scholarship program designed to find her, then let her believe she'd earned it entirely on merit. Yet as the city lights blurred through her tears, Val couldn't deny the connection that still existed between them. A connection Harrison had failed to sever despite decades of effort. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maxwell. Whatever you're thinking, remember this. Harrison destroyed both our families to keep us apart. Don't let him win, even in death. Val pulled over, considering his words. For 15 years, she'd built a life defined by Harrison's interference, her education, her career choice, even her trust issues. Was she going to let his final revelation define her future as well? The answer came with surprising clarity. For the first time in 15 years, Val knew exactly what she wanted, and it had nothing to do with the past. Val drove to the one place that had always represented hope to her, Columbia University's library. The campus was quiet at this hour, but the library remained open for late-night studiers. She parked Maxwell's car and walked through the familiar gates, her borrowed dress drawing curious glances from passing students. Inside the library, she made her way to the ancient history section. Unlike her previous visit, Maxwell wasn't there. It was just Val and the books that had witnessed their first meeting 15 years ago. She ran her fingers along the spines of volumes on Egyptian economics, the very books Maxwell had been searching for when they met. A lifetime ago, it seemed. Her phone vibrated with a text from Maxwell. Where are you? She hesitated before responding. Where it all began. 20 minutes later, footsteps approached. Maxwell appeared, his tie loosened, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and hope. How'd the announcement go? Val asked. I told them the foundation would be renamed for your mother. I didn't mention the rest. He leaned against a bookshelf. The press will have a sanitized version of my father's legacy. For now. And later. Later is up to us. Maxwell studied her face. What are you thinking? Val looked around the quiet corner that had changed both their lives. I'm thinking about choices. My grandmother chose money over justice. My mother chose silence over truth. Even you chose to create a scholarship program rather than tell me directly you were looking for me. And what are you choosing now? To break the cycle. Val met his gaze steadily. Harrison spent his life making choices based on fear and secrets. He killed to protect his reputation, manipulated to hide his past, and died alone despite his wealth and power. And my choice was to find you, at any cost. Maxwell moved closer. Was that wrong? Not wrong. Just incomplete. Val touched the silver clip still in her hair. You found me, but kept part of yourself hidden, just like your father did, just like my mother did. Maxwell nodded slowly. No more secrets, then. No more manipulations. No more living in the shadow of what Harrison did, Val agreed. Whatever happens between us needs to be our choice, not a reaction to his actions. What do you want, Val? Truly want. To finish medical school. To become the oncologist my mother needed and never had. To stop running from who I am. She took a deep breath. And to see if what's between us is real or just the ghost of what might have been. Maxwell reached into his pocket and removed a small velvet box, the one he'd shown her weeks ago containing her sapphire necklace. But when he opened it, there was something else inside, a simple silver key. What's this? Val asked. The key to a small apartment near NYU Medical Center. Not a penthouse, not a mansion, just a decent place within your budget that doesn't require 3 jobs to afford. Maxwell held it out. No strings attached. You can finish school without financial stress, whether or not we have a future together. Val didn't take the key. I need to do this on my own terms. I understand. Maxwell returned the key to his pocket. What about us? One step at a time. Val reached for his hand. Coffee tomorrow? Just coffee, nothing more. Coffee sounds perfect. Maxwell's fingers intertwined with hers. And maybe dinner next week? Maybe. A small smile touched Val's lips. We have time now. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the library windows. The sound took them both back to their first meeting, a nervous freshman shelving books, a charming sophomore researching Egyptian economics, a chance encounter during a thunderstorm. We should go, Val said. I need to return Zoe's dress, and you probably have 1,000 things to deal with after the announcement. Let them wait, Maxwell said. I've spent 15 years letting other things take priority. Not tonight. They walked together through the quiet library, past students absorbed in their studies, oblivious to the story of betrayal and redemption unfolding beside them. Outside, the rain had intensified. Maxwell removed his jacket, holding it over Val as they ran to his car. The simple gesture, protecting her without trying to control her, spoke volumes about the man he'd become. I have something for you, Val said as they reached the car. She unclasped the vintage watch from her wrist, the one containing their photo, and handed it to him. Open it. Inside was the faded photograph of 2 college students, but beneath it was something new, a small handwritten note. The past doesn't define our future, Maxwell read aloud. It only teaches us to treasure it more carefully. When did you write this? Just now, Val admitted. When I realized what I wanted. And what do you want, Valentina soars? A chance. Not to go back, we can't, but to move forward, together. 1 year later, on a bright spring day, Val stood on the stage at NYU's commencement ceremony, accepting her medical degree with honors. In the audience, Eleanor Blackwood dabbed at tears beside Maxwell, who watched with undisguised pride. The past year hadn't been easy. They'd made public the truth about Harrison's crimes, established a memorial fund for the victims of the Davidson chemical fire, and navigated the complex emotions of building a relationship not defined by their family secrets. But as Val stepped off the stage, diploma in hand, she knew they'd made the right choice. Not to forget the past, but to ensure it no longer controlled their future. Dr. Valentina Soares Blackwood had finally come home.